Welcome, unbelievers! In my last lecture, I tried to explain how we go about deciding if we should accept if something is true. But most theists would say that the same thing applies the other way around. Although we cannot accept that something exists without evidence, we also can't accept that something does not exist without evidence. To a certain extent, this is certainly true. After all, saying that the statement God exists is false is the same as saying that the statement God does not exist is true. And as I've explained before, we cannot accept that something is true without evidence. This is one of the reasons that atheism is not defined as the belief that God does not exist, but rather as the lack of belief that he does. Claiming that no gods exist without evidence is contrary to how we think we should go about deciding if something is true. To demonstrate this, I'd like to go back to the analogy of the void that I used in my last lecture. The void represents all the infinite and unknown possibilities in the universe. In our lives we discover things that are true, and from that we build a construct of what we know to be true. Our evidence is like shining a light in the darkness. This, however, does not mean that the things in the void are not true. We simply have not been able to shine our light there yet. We cannot know yet if they are true or false. The only thing we can say about them is this: they are not yet part of what we have discovered to be true. Before we start an argument about gods, they fall under this category by definition. Since I do not know your definition of a god, nor your evidence, I cannot say beforehand whether he, she, or it exists or not. I don't know what you believe, so how can I judge it? All I can say is that what you are telling me is not yet part of what I have accepted to be true, which is very different from saying that what you are talking about is false. This is the distinction between simply lacking a belief in God and actively believing that God does not exist. God does not exist is an active statement, a statement about truth, and it requires evidence. Lacking a belief, however, does not. So please, pretty please, stop asking atheists for evidence that God does not exist, and stop asserting that atheism means the belief that God does not exist. We might make this assertion for certain specific gods with impossible qualities like omnipotence, or even claim that every God concept we have ever run across so far is more likely to be untrue than true. But this is not the view that we are defending. What we are defending is nothing more than the default position, which is that we should not accept that gods exist until evidence is given for it. Atheism, meaning the lack of belief, is very important. And what I have given so far is the basis for several other arguments about why we use this definition. I will go over several of these in the hopes of cementing a firmer understanding of the concept, because I believe that this understanding is vital in order to have a rational discussion. It is impossible to have a good discussion if you do not understand where the other side is coming from, what they represent, and why. Last lesson I explained why lacking a belief in God is the default position when taking a philosophical and logical approach to the question of existence. Today I'd like to show you that in practice it is also necessarily the default position in life. To do this, I want you to imagine a baby. He grows up, he learns about the world, he learns about the trees, he learns about Santa Claus, and one day he learns about the concept of God. To the people who say that not believing that God exists automatically means that you believe that he does not exist, I ask you this one question. Before learning about God, did the baby believe he exists? I think that you will find that he did not, nor that he believed that God did not exist. He was blissfully unaware. This is the natural state in which we humans start out. But then someone proposes the idea of God, and some people accept it. The atheist position is that this was a mistake. Moving away from the default position requires evidence. Why would you change your opinion without a reason? That makes no sense. And this should give you a clearer understanding about how atheist versus theist debates work. The theist tries to give evidence and reason to make the atheist move away from his default position. In contrast, the atheist tries to show the problems with the theistic arguments and evidence in order to prove that the theist should never have moved away from the default position in the first place. So the atheist doesn't necessarily need to provide counter-arguments. He is right in staying at the default position until the theist provides good evidence for the claim that his statement is true. And if the atheist proves that the evidence is faulty, then he has proven that the theist should never have left the default position, which means that the theist should come back to the atheist's side. This is very important to understand. It is why atheists laugh at you when you ask them to give evidence that atheism is correct. What you're asking is, give evidence that it is right to not accept that what we say is true. It is right because you do not give evidence. I do not require evidence in order to not accept that what you say is true. All I need is for you to not give me evidence that it is. If you understand everything I've said so far, then you might wonder why we atheists define ourselves as people who lack the belief that God exists, and not as people who lack a belief that God does not exist. Because is this not an equally valid stance to take? It is, to some degree. However, there's one important difference. People who believe that God does not exist are not the problem. People do not propose the concept of God to you in order to convince you that he does not exist. If we discover a tribe that has no concept of gods, there will not be people going there and saying, "Could I talk to you a moment about God?" telling them about gods, and then telling them that they don't exist. It just doesn't happen. Telling people that God does not exist is always a reaction to someone else proclaiming that he does. It is the people who have accepted the claim that God exists who started it. They started the problem, and they are the ones trying to enforce their dogma on other people, getting their unfounded beliefs taught in schools and enforced by laws. They are the ones who started this mess, and they are the ones that we need to convince to change their way. After all, living not having accepted that God exists is the same as living as if he does not exist. There is no difference. That is one of the reasons that we try to combine these two viewpoints, because in practice they are the same. They have the same way of living connected to them. Like always, there are other reasons as well, and together they form a web where understanding one part increases your understanding of all the other parts connected to it. But we might discuss the other reasons some other time. For now, I'm Dutch Dread, and I hope that this video is able to teach something to someone.